सां वठियो वज़ीराعظم عمران خان فرانسيسي ميگزين کي انٽرويو ڪري رهيو آهي.
But having said that, I believe that the only way forward, if we are looking for the well-being of almost 40 million Afghan citizens, is to sooner or later recognize the government, because there is no other alternative right now. There's not even, when the Taliban were in power last time, there was a Northern Alliance where there was a conflict going on. There's no conflict now in Afghanistan, which is, by the way, after 40 years, this is the first time the country is conflict-free, apart from, small terrorist organizations, which the more stability in Afghanistan, the less chance of any of these international terrorists to survive there. So I feel that the only way forward is recognition. Pakistan can't do it alone. I think we're consulting all the regional countries. But, for the well-being of the people of Afghanistan, sooner or later they will have to recognize Afghanistan. Now the question is, what are the conditions? Now, as far as I can see from, there's an international consensus that there should be one inclusive government. And number two, human rights, specifically female rights, women rights. So the Taliban government pledged both. They've talked about human rights and they've talked about inclusive government. Now the question is, what will it take for the world to be satisfied that the Taliban meet the condition? Right. This is really the condition, because they've agreed to the two conditions.
So actually, you're talking about women's rights, for example. When Mr. Mutaki was here in Islamabad for the OIC summit, for example, this issue of women's rights, was it raised with him, and what did he say? I mean, as you know, so far in some provinces, universities are still closed for women. Some schools are also still closed. Did he give concrete word on this issue?
It's not concrete. They agreed to the principle. Right. How they will go about it, if anyone is familiar with the Afghan character, they should realize that they are very, very proud people. And, you can't push them. They hate outside interference. In 2001, Pakistan was one of the 3 countries that recognized Afghanistan. Yet when Pakistan tried to tell the Taliban, to hand over Osama bin Laden to the Americans, they point blank refused. So there's a limit to, what outside interference or pressure can do to a government, specifically a government which is fiercely independent like the Taliban. So just a caution that if anyone thinks that you can force them, force the pace of what they believe is an inclusive government and human rights, well, it's not going to happen. And we should not expect, what we expect women's rights, according to what the people of Afghanistan think and what are Western women's rights. There's a big gulf between the two, and that's not going to happen. Western-style women's rights, if that is an expectation in Afghanistan, will not happen. But, they've agreed that girls should be allowed to study. So that's, there's no, at least that one point, they have, when they came here, they agreed. Right. They said, we're just taking our time, we are seeing the right conditions, but they've agreed to that.
Right. So, as far as security concerns, I'd like to know a bit more about the security concerns you have coming from Afghanistan. More precisely, you know that the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan has bases in eastern Afghanistan, especially Loya Paktia. There are also the possibility that some Baloch insurgent groups could be also active from Afghanistan. They've carried out a couple of attacks against Pakistan recently. Are these some of your most pressing concerns that you have at the moment?
2 concerns. Number one is are the refugees. Pakistan already has over 3 million Afghan refugees. And the worry is, if things deteriorate in Afghanistan, if this humanitarian crisis gets worse, then there will be a bigger flow of refugees into the country. Already, we have almost, since the fall of Kabul, we have almost 240,000 Afghans who've come into Pakistan. So number one, I mean, you know, the country just cannot take more refugees. We don't have the resources, and has half its exports, almost half, are into the European Union. France is one of the most important countries and a trading partner. So my Pakistan's main interest is to fix our economy, make our country stand on its feet, care about the 220 million Pakistanis. So therefore my main interest is the economy. And because of that, France is extremely important for us.
What are your requirements? What are your plan or ideas to strengthen this bilateral relationship? Do you have any particular ideas in mind that you would like to implement?
Well, I mean, you know, because of COVID, there was hardly any international travel or communication. You had virtual meetings everywhere. So, but you know, ideally, I would like to meet President Macron and discuss our bilateral ties. Yes.
Right. Have you been able to plan a phone call with him so far?
Yes, I've spoken to President Macron twice.
Okay. Okay. So when do you think Pakistan will appoint an ambassador in Paris?
I think we are in the process of doing so.
Right. Okay. 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 Of course, I would like to talk to you about the bilateral.
चीन सिंध वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान इंटरव्यू ॾेई रहियो हुयो। संदसि चवणु आहे त पाकिस्तान में 30 लख खां वधीक पनाहगीर रहनि था। पाकिस्तान हिन वक़्त ताईं अफ़गान हुकूमत खे तस्लीम न कयो आहे। अफ़गानिस्तान जे मामले ते सभिनी खे गॾु खणी हलणो आहे।
Because they were fighting foreign occupation against the Soviets. We trained them along with CIA. 10 years later, 89, the Soviets leave. And then come 2001, the US arrives in Afghanistan. Now we are trying to tell the same people who have been trained to fight foreign occupation, now we are telling them that fighting the US occupation is terrorism. So they turned against us. Okay. My point was we should have stayed neutral. So the Pakistani Taliban turned against us because all the operations against the Soviets took place from the tribal areas, adjoining districts to Afghanistan. They became Pakistan Taliban who turned against us. And secondly, the old Mujahideen groups, they turned against us, like Al-Qaeda. So Pakistan lost 80,000 people. I mean, which ally of the US lost so many people? And yet Pakistan got blamed for the failure in Afghanistan. So I disagreed with that. But apart from that, right now we have shared aim with the US. We want no terrorism from Afghanistan. We are against international terrorism. So is the US. So we have a shared interest. And I hope that US also realizes that you know, they originally came to Afghanistan to fight international terrorism, Al-Qaeda. And now if it goes into chaos, you could end up the same position again. So therefore, we have a shared interest for stability in Afghanistan.
Okay, so does that mean that Pakistan will participate in this over-the-horizon policy strategy?
It can only happen with the permission of the Taliban government. And if they allow it, then it can happen. But otherwise, last thing we want is another conflict with this now Afghan government. After having lost 80,000 people now, Pakistan cannot afford another conflict. So we will be partners in peace with the US, but not in conflict.
Okay. Let me ask you a bit of a personal question, but you know, when I was living in Pakistan at the end of the 2009-2013, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton came to Pakistan for a visit, and she was asked by a student in Lahore that, you know, you Americans, you abandoned us after 89. What are the guarantees that we have that you will not abandon us again? Now, the United States have shifted their priorities away from this region. Do you feel that you've been betrayed again?
Frankly, I don't blame the United States. I blame our own leadership. The job of the leadership of this country is to protect the interest of its own people. It's not the job of United States to protect the interest of Pakistani people.
Right.
So why did Pakistan allow itself to be used? Clearly, we became part of the US war against the Soviets through Afghanistan, in 80s. But once that was over, a year later, sanctions were slapped on Pakistan. So Pakistan should have learned then. That's why I opposed, Pakistan joining the US war on terror after 2001, because number one, we had trained these mujahideen to fight foreign occupation. Now, how were we going to stop them? And when we joined them, they turned against us. But secondly, we felt used after, when we were in 91, these pressless sanctions were imposed on Pakistan. After Pakistan was neighboring, we had 4 million Afghan refugees. We had Kalashnikovs in us, first time. We had sectarian militant groups left in Pakistan, fallout of the Afghan jihad in the 80s. So now, by joining them, I opposed it. I thought we should stay neutral. But I still remember George Bush's statement saying that we will not abandon Pakistan again.
Yeah.
And they did.
Okay. Last question. Do you have any plan to visit France? Is there any official visit for France which could be in the pipeline anytime soon, or is it something that you could do?
Not yet, but yes, of course, I would like to visit France.
Right. After Prime Minister Gilani in 2011, it's been 11 years since Pakistani Prime Minister visited France, but I hope it will happen. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Prime Minister.
फ्रांसी मैगज़ीन खे इंटरव्यू ॾेई रहियो हो। संचोड़ा त अफ़गानिस्तान में अमन सां दुनिया में अमन क़ाइमु थींदो। अफ़गानिस्तान में 40 सालनि खां पोइ अमन क़ाइमु थियो आहे। वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान चयो त पाकिस्तान अकेलो अफ़गानिस्तान जी मदद नथो करे सघे। वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान चयो त दुनिया सां बहितर तालुकात हूंदा त मईशत वधंदी। वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान चयो आहे त पाकिस्तान में माशी तौर ते पंहिंजे पेरनि ते बीहण जी कोशिश करे रहियो आहे। पाकिस्तान हिन वक़्त ताईं अफ़गान हुकूमत खे तस्लीम नाहे करे सघियो। वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान चयो त तालिबान हुकूमत खे तस्लीम करण खां अलावा ॿियो को चांस नाहे।